G'day there ladies and gents of the internet, I am the Braveheart Aussie and welcome to a journey in world building. Today we're going to take a little bit of a break from our recent successfully completed dive into our first planetary setting, that of the planet of Samiyaji. Instead we're going to go back and have a look at a new concept within our Dark Diaspora universe. This video is inspired by a comment a couple of weeks ago now from the @AGameCrasher the Master Gamer 8485. The comment raised a really interesting point, which I'll paraphrase here in saying that if all the planets in the diaspora are terrible for humanity to live on, why don't they just live on space stations? I thought this was a fantastic point that deserved its own video exploration. Because we have already started to establish the idea of space stations existing without our universe, with the most notable example being the station in orbit of Lost Earth of Bridgehead Station. Originally established by the United Redevelopment Authority as their orbital outpost, this space station is a gargantuan toroid-shaped station that serves simultaneously as a beachhead in space, an orbital manufacturer, a temporary accommodation and housing platform, as well as a major interstellar transport hub. The idea was that people would be lifted off Lost Earth and then temporarily housed and fed in Bridgehead Station before being loaded into pods to be distributed across the diaspora. At least that was the original intention and goal of the station. 6 centuries later, the station has devolved in many ways as the United Redevelopment Authority has effectively become abolished as a viable ongoing concern. Instead, the station has now become an overpopulated dystopian cyberpunk nightmarescape. The station, which was once intended to house upwards of only 100,000 people at a time, has a current population that exceeds 500,000 people across its 9 levels. The technology surrounding anti-gravity fields have been used to create artificial gravity on the station, meaning its toroid shape is split into different layers or levels, each of which are about 30 meters high. Within the station, these levels have become tantamount to streets or city blocks, as more and more makeshift and haphazard developments and housing, above and beyond that of the original prefabricated homes, has been added in order to support the population. There is significant lack of infrastructure and organisation to the levels, creating winding streetscapes that exist in an almost perpetual nighttime setting. Deteriorating atmospheric scrubbers, as well as the penchant of residents to manufacture and burn things out in the open, has meant that smog and pollution on all levels is rampant. At this point in time, new residents are no longer being added to the population from Lost Earth, but instead are being grown automatically out of frozen embryos from gene vats. This approach is actually a common one adopted by planets early in the diaspora's history as a way of boosting the population of new settlements. But because the technology involved is somewhat unknown, or the knowledge has been lost to new and existing residents, particularly in the absence of the overarching governing authority on the station, new residents are continually being added to the population despite the strain on resources. This automated character of the station is also reflected in the autonomous artificial food production, with carbo blocks and protein strips being constantly produced and output to vending machines across the station for people to use. There is a significant class element to the station, with remnants of the Redevelopment Authority, as well as more wealthy and less reputable residents using their position to secure freshly grown food from some of the remaining greenhouses that ring the station. With fresh food is now regarded as one of the biggest luxury items for most people on the station. The absence of authority also means that a number of major gangs now effectively run the station and are in constant battle with one another for influence, power, and control over the lucrative drug and other criminal activities. For the newborn residents who grow up on the station in the absence of family and support, the gangs are an attractive and sometimes only source of personal security. But the price they have to pay in terms of their innocence and the activities they are forced to undertake is often too much for many, and when possible, such people will attempt to flee and strike out on their own. Thankfully, the dystopian cyberpunk streetscapes of the station, it's easy to disappear. So now we've dived into that of Bridgehead Station in a little bit more detail as an example of an existing major space station within the diaspora. And we're going to use that as the setting for this week's lore video. The question remains, what does all this mean for space station living across the diaspora? From my perspective, there are two forms of space constructs: orbital and deep space. The problem with space station construction isn't lift capacity from the planetary surface, as anti-gravity manifolds provide the opportunity for large constructs to be launched from planet side. Instead, it's a question of sheer industrial capacity required to produce a station components and construct them and assemble them in orbit. So basically, it's a question of cost and economic capacity. There are very few powers within the Diaspora, even 6 centuries later, after the loss of Earth, that have the capacity to launch and maintain high amenity, safe and large capacity orbital space stations that would act as a legitimate alternative to even the most arduous of planetary surfaces. This doesn't mean they don't exist, and I can see them being a significant part of the orbital platforms around planets like Janfar or Galador or even Samiyaji. These stations wouldn't be purely residential and would also have a secondary or even sometimes primary function, serving as the main interstellar pod launching platform within that system. So purely residential stations are unlikely to be a priority given the cost, while commercial, industrial and transport stations are likely that provide distinct economic capacity. Increases or changes are likely to be preferred. So therefore residential is going to be a secondary factor rather than a primary factor. Then we have deep space stations and where they come into the mix. These stations are located outside of the orbit of the major habitable or populated planet of the systems, and are usually an anchor for a non-terrestrial resource gathering operation. An example of this is actually already in our lore videos in the past, when the Ethereal Light spaceship and their fleet of mercenaries attacked a deep space mining operation within the Janfar system. That was actually a great example of a deep space station in which the focus was on collecting and gathering and distributing resources. It also had a secondary role of accommodating the residential needs of workers. However, there was also a really heavy reliance on automation and drones in the mining activity itself, meaning that even in these circumstances, the stations don't provide a significant residential solution. So the next question is, could they? In theory, yes. Living in space continues to have the challenges of radiation, and also the fact that you have to maintain the integrity of fully enclosed environments within the void. Even if they are developed, it's always going to be a question as to whether, given the hostile nature of space as a living environment, whether it would still not be more attractive to locate in enclosed modules on a planetary surface, even if that is hostile. Given the role of anti-gravity technology in enabling almost effortless orbital lift capacity, traditional planet-bound constraints of settlements are less of a disadvantage over that of space stations than, say, in the current environment where we're using rockets. One way we could explore space stations in the lore of our universe is maybe by having a specific faction that's potentially something of a religious cult that uses a space station as its own mobile refuge. Given the penchant for the Tarvan Covenant to run crusades against emerging religions, I could see a space station potentially move between stars as an attractive base of operation for a cult. This would make a really interesting dynamic, as it would likely to have to need and be headed by an extremely wealthy individual to bankroll construction of this nature and maintain it in the long term. Anyway, that's definitely something that I'd love to explore at another time. But that's where we're going to leave it today. Thank you again to everybody who has joined me. Shortly, I'm going to be putting out a poll to see what our next setting is going to be, so we can explore more of our universe. I'm actually probably going to take next week off to start working on the content of that setting for its next 3-episode run once the poll closes, so there may not be any videos out. In the meantime, make sure you go and check out my Discord, as well as my World Anvil site, the details of which are in the description below, and so you can find some more interesting tidbits about the Dark Diaspora universe. But thanks again, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and may the journey continue.